Welcome to the Thrive series for 2023. Today, I am delighted to introduce you to Sarah, the Pivoter Kalmeta, aviation performance consultant, and the founder and CEO of Pivot Point International. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me with you today, Aimee.
Oh, I am so glad that we could hang out together and talk about thriving, because I know you have some great perspectives and possibly unusual perspectives from what people have potentially experienced. So, to kick it off, I have a multitude of questions for you, but to kick it off, what is it here in this time and space? What does thriving mean to you?
Well, I'm glad that you asked the question this way in this time and space, because words can carry different meaning at different points in our lives, right? Depending on the season we're going through, what's going on in our personal lives, at work, in our relationships. And, the kind of standard definition is someone that's successful or flourishing or prospering. They're very lively, but what does that mean, right? That's very kind of ethereal. It's hard to touch. And so for me, thriving has always been this foundation of knowing that it's all going to be okay. Even when I might have experienced some obstacle or stickiness or difficulty, I know that it's going to be okay. And so I don't react, I'm more able to be calm and work through whatever it is, take my time. There's more patience. So that's my foundation of thriving. Right now, it's funny you use the word space, because my definition of thriving is really to have that space in my life, space between moments, space between words, space between this action and the next action. For most of my life, I didn't have a lot of space there. I was always go, 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 climb to the top as fast as you can. And, right now in this moment, in this last, let's say 30 days or so, I've really been playing with that concept of space and allowing that to be more in my sphere rather than constantly on.
Right. And so what have you noticed, especially in the last 30 days? How has that felt to have more to have more space, but then also just be more aware of it?
It's felt really like luxurious and scrumptious, like to use these words, because it's just felt, I'm getting more sleep, right? And so it's that, after a long sleep, when you wake up and you kind of stretch and you've got the nice sheets, they've just, fresh linen on the bed and everything's comfortable, kind of like when you're on a holiday and, the breeze is coming in through the window, and just, you're so content in that moment when you breathe, when you first wake up. So that's the luxuriousness of what I'm feeling by having more space. And the reason why I say scrumptious is because it's just like everything is so much more playful and tasty the way that I experience it, because I'm actually able to savor the moments because I'm in them, rather than up in here in my mind thinking, well, what happens next and next and next, 10 steps ahead.
Right.
That served me in the corporate world. It served me in aviation for many years, and it will serve me in other ways, I'm sure. Sometimes we need to do those things. But by creating more space between all of that, it's just been this very visceral, enjoyable experience, even when I'm not doing things. And in the past, that used to just cue anxiety. Cue can't sleep.
Yes.
So it's really been a play of what's working, what's not working. How do I adapt? How do I listen to what I need in that moment? What kind of space do I need? Is it space for myself? Is it space to think, to be creative, space for exercise? So the space can have so many other nuances and flavors as well.
Yes. And I love the word space. I like, it's always given me a good feeling. And this must be very timely, because just yesterday, in the group that I coach, we were talking about space and what is it about trying to fill space so rapidly sometimes, whether it's a
Mm,
space like a pause in a conversation or, fill up our surroundings. So we were really exploring that, but space plays into what you do as
mm,
well, um,
yes.
in aviation.
It
So,
does.
yeah, tell us a little bit about how you got into that.
Well, funnily enough, I've always been interested in space. As a young child, I was always looking up into the sky and would love going to the planetarium. I wanted to be an astronaut. My first two words were for star and airplane. Um,
Oh,
so it's always been in my realm and something that I've really enjoyed. Um, so when I, was deciding what I was going to do with my life, I've experienced a pivot. I thought I'd be a figure skater, Olympic gold medalist, and then be a skating coach. That was like my dream. Watched Tara Lipinski go, and before she was 16, and she qualified, and all these big things, right? But alas, not meant to be. Knee injuries, and sustained some serious injuries, which meant that I couldn't progress my training. So I pivoted to the next thing that I was passionate about and still remain passionate about to this day, which is space and flying and, that travel, that being able to do impossible things and have that wonder and awe. That's, I think, what really the crux of it is. It's that wonder of, 100 years ago, this what, wow, now a little bit over 100 years ago, but, over a century ago, 1800s, this was not possible, right? It was nothing we could have imagined. Sure, we had some ideas about it, but it was not in our realm of possibility. And now it is. So what else can be, And I think that's what really got me interested into that aviation and aerospace sector.
yes. And so, okay, thinking about where I want to go first because I've got a couple of questions wrapped around this. So, getting into aviation took you immediately to another country, or did you have some space in between?
We're going to get so punny on this podcast.
I know.
Already
I
tell.
can feel it coming on.
Um, um, I did have a little space between. So I worked for a couple different companies right after I graduated from university. And the second one was based in Los Angeles, and they had airplanes in Singapore and Hong Kong. And then when they went to open their office in Singapore, they sent me over to help train up the staff and get that office moving.
Okay. And so, having lived internationally and, been immersed in another culture and maybe more than one because perhaps you traveled as well while you were
Yes.
there. Um, how did that experience shape your ideas around thriving and possibly about, I feel like thriving has a lot to do with as well, what our priorities are, what our values are. Um, yeah, I'd love to hear how that integrated with your own ideas of thriving.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly impacted my ideas of thriving. Um, it, it was very eye-opening to go overseas, especially to an Asian culture. Now, I did study Asian studies as a minor at university, and I learned Mandarin as well. And so I was able to utilize, they do speak Mandarin in Singapore as well as English. So I had the opportunity to practice, but just to get things from a different perspective. And then I spent time in China for about a year and a half. And then I was in Hong Kong for 10 years before I pivoted back to the US earlier this year. And, Asian cultures are a lot more collective than American or a lot of Western societies. So there's a lot more focus on the community, the we, rather than just me, right? And I'm very extroverted and I'm very gregarious and, I like to be with people.
Yeah.
But what I learned was for someone who might be introverted or of that other mindset, that might be seen differently, right? That's not valued as much. And so learning how to navigate friendships, coworkers, leading a team, making sure that they were motivated while I stayed motivated as well, was certainly a very, enriching experience being overseas. Because I was exposed to so many different Asian cultures and then subsets within those cultures, based on the type of work we were doing, what community that was a part of. And so community became a big part of my vocabulary in terms of thriving. It used to be very much like I'm thriving because I'm successful, I'm achieving, I got these awards, I, me, right? And that was what was praised in my youth and my upbringing, and in the US, very individualistic society. It was like people were horrified if you were living with your parents beyond, college years kind of thing. Whereas I remember my very first one of my very first lunches at the company I worked for in Hong Kong. We were talking about the meals we had, and she asked if I prepared my lunch. I said yes. I said, "Oh, did you prepare yours?" She said, "No, my mom did." I was like, "Oh, that's nice. Do you live close to your mom?" She said, "Yeah, she lives with me," or "I live with her." I forget which phrase she used. She was not married, so she most likely said, "I live with my mom."
Mhm.
And the initial thought I had was, "What? How old are you?"
Yeah.
And it was this kind of shock at first, but then this realization of, is that so bad? No, I mean, of course, we all, when it comes to our own parents, where we get triggered and we have all sorts of thoughts. But the culture there, the kind of standard, due to many reasons, culture, high cost of living, small living spaces, and not being able to afford living on your own. You live with your parents until you get married. And then when you get married, you move into a bigger home, and your parents then live with you, and they take care of your children.
Yeah. Okay.
While you go to work.
Yeah.
Right. So there's just different dynamics, right? And that really made me think about that aspect of, how do we treat our elders versus, oh, the old people, right? And so there's even just these little nuances created perspective shifts, the language patterns changed. So that really shifted in the sense of, it was no longer just about, what I could do, it was about what we could do. And then how could it be enriched for everybody? And, of course, I still went through periods of, my own success and my own focus, but ultimately that was there at a much earlier stage than it might have been had I not been in Asia.
Oh, that sounds really enriching, as you said. And I just think of all of the value that I feel like we're experiencing this a little bit to a small degree in the US now, with all the shifts since the pandemic, that because of high costs, um, people are finding themselves in, whether it's living with family, but more people are coming together to help one
Yes.
another out. Um,
Yes.
and so just kind of leaning into that feeling of community, particularly when we really need it, and how good that feels. Um, so yeah, I can imagine that really added another dimension to your thoughts about thriving.
Yes. And especially as, as an expat overseas, you don't have your family there.
Yeah.
So you're intentionally choosing the people that you spend your time with. And a lot of holidays, you are in that country that you're working in, that you've chosen to live in, because you may not have any more leave to go home. As you mentioned before, I traveled a lot around the region, both for work and leisure. And some years, it was very often that I would only go home for Christmas once every 2 years.
Yeah.
And then maybe I saw some people at different stages if I had a work trip in the US and I could piggyback, seeing family. So when you then go through these experiences, these holidays, these moments that are traditionally spent with, nuclear family, extended family, you're now spending it with family that you've chosen, you've created, you've cultivated. And so that's your community. And so that actually is a really integral part of being able to sustain being away. The people who don't have that level of connection usually are only at an outposting state appointment as an expatriate for a couple of years, because then they want to go back home.
Yeah.
The ones that can then find, become a part of, or create and nurture their own communities, they're usually the ones that end up staying there and have families there.
So the words that come to mind as you're describing that is like how thriving is related to resilience, and how
Yes.
thriving is related to endurance, kind of, which goes with that as well.
Yeah.
So how about with pivoting? Another word that I love is pivot. And so Sarah the Pivoter, and then what you've named your business. This word, I feel like we took more note of around the pandemic time. And I know that your life shifted because of the pandemic, or, you know, like there were things going on and choices that you were making during that time. So tell us more about pivoting, in particular with the pandemic, and if there's any new pivots that you are making.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in Hong Kong in 2020, I was still working for an aviation company in the business aviation space. And when COVID hit, you know, I was running the business and in charge of several different countries in Asia Pacific and plugged in with senior management. So I could see very quickly that my role was not going to survive if this pandemic, or issue at the time, we weren't yet using that word, lasted. You know, and the first big major pivot I had after the figure skating into aviation was in 2008 during the global financial crisis. I had a lot of awareness on my environment. And I think that's really important, is to be able to have the awareness of your environment so that you can pivot rather than feeling like a deer in the headlights, stuck to the ground, right? It's important to have roots that go down so that you have stability, right? As above, so below.
Yeah.
But you also need to bend like reeds in the wind. You know, it's not the hardest stick that's going to survive, because that can snap. And that's usually what ends up happening, because people don't have this foundation to support the change. And so, you know, we just finished the World Cup, right? And thinking about football or soccer, you know, whatever term you use, there's pivoting happen all the time. That those lateral quick movements, right? They're assessing the environment around them so that they can decide, like the play that they might have just discussed was, you know, I'm going to go this way. And now all of a sudden something has happened. It's gone off sides. It's gone off the field, corner kicks, right? Penalty kicks. They have to pivot what they're going to do. And they can't talk to their coach. They don't have, you know, little, like Formula One, where they've got something in their ear and they're getting kind of lifetime instruction. So the ability to change direction quickly without injuring yourself, right? If you don't practice that lateral movement, then you will, you know, sprain an ankle or trip over yourself. The ability to have the confidence that you can make those decisions on your own, you know, that you don't need to know what's going to happen in the second half of the game. I mean, anyone who watched this recent World Cup knows that in the beginning, everyone was like, oh, it's a shoo-in. And then it was like last minute, went to penalties, right? Changed everything. And so peeling it back, right? Less is more. And that's, you know, the Japanese concept of ma. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
Not.
No. So ma means emptiness in space. It's an interval in time. And it's related to that Zen philosophy, right? It's that everything and nothing. You know, what is the no thingness of the moment, right? And we typically think nothing is bad, but no thing is this pool of pure potentiality. And so when we start to shift our awareness to this philosophy, this way of being, rather than constantly doing and adding complexity, we can be that soccer player on the field that can assess the environment around him or her and change directions. And sometimes that direction might even perceivingly be going backwards, but it's to get around an obstacle or to pass to somebody else, right? And that's another very important part of pivoting is it's not always you that will continue down the path that you've pivoted to. You might pass it to someone else. You might pass the next turnoff completely. So with this in mind, I thought the reason why so many people in 2020 in particular were so stuck with change is because they might have been doing something for 20, 30, 40 years. And they never stopped to ask themselves what this direction they were in meant. Did they still want to go there?
Yeah.
Was it still aligned with who they wanted to be, what they were doing in their life? What were the values that they were holding? It was kind of like, set your targets at 18, go to school, follow the path, and that's it.
Yeah.
And they did that. And it worked for a period of time. But then with this, it was like the rug was ripped out. There was no foundation. Everyone was just it was like we were shaken out of a dream to, oh, hey, what's really going on here? But we didn't have the skill set to look around and assess and make decisions. So we told ourselves stories. Oh, no, that won't happen to me. No, that's that industry. That's not my industry.
Right.
No, you're too valuable. That will never happen to you. And we stayed, comfortable in that head in the sand because we didn't have the foundational skills to pivot, to deal with change because everything had been, so good for so long. And when we are happy, it's great. Life's wonderful.
Yeah.
But we also don't seek change.
Right.
And so it's really about how do we understand these changes in life and the seasons and then be able to make better decisions from that.
Yes. Yes. I love that. And relating it back to sports too, and something that recently happened as well with the World Cup. So
Yes.
what's next? You made that pivot as you were, I like that idea of adaptability that you were talking about, and being aware. And as you started to
Yes.
see these things unfold and understand that the job you were in was definitely going to go through at least a time period of shifting.
Right.
And so now, as you have you found yourself shifting more than once as 2020 has gone into 2021, 22, and now 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. There were many pivots. Sarah the Pivoter has been pivoting a lot. Even when I first launched my business, I focused on the university space. I'd been running a program in Asia for a long time within the industry, bringing webinars and sessions to schools on how people could get into aviation, how they could pivot into, what were their transferable skills.
Yeah.
So then, of course, at that time, it was how do I pivot out? What can I do instead?
Yeah.
So that was where a lot of my focus was. A lot of the career coaching came into play there. I had another business that I had set up at the same time. We took advantage of the situation and the opportunities that we had presented, and we were able to.
We're having a little tough technical difficulty here. Let's see if we can get
to teach part-time at a local studio. I'd always been getting Reiki sessions for myself and doing this form of, energetic getting space, slowing down, because I didn't know how to do that on my own. So I would go and have a session. And to be a lawyer too. So that's why I was able to go, because I used to think, okay, if this guy was a lawyer and gave up his law practice to now be a Reiki master and help people, calm down, and he still does executive coaching, I can respect that. I can get on board, right? Because I was not into any meditation or anything that was spiritual or woo, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole at the time, you know. And he just said to me one day, Sarah, you're coming in quite often. Why don't you just learn how to do it and do it for yourself?
Yeah.
And I was like, I could do that. And he was like, yeah, of course. How do you think I became a master? Right. And I was like, oh, okay. So that opened up my mind a little bit. I went and did the training. I started offering Reiki sessions and, you know, had that thriving, that business was thriving for a while. Then I decided to dive back into the coaching because that's really where my heart lay. And I knew there was something there to be born to, you know, that I needed to create. And so I took all of that and, you know, put that into a coaching program, which was called the Success Program. Success was the other pivoter. That was successful. I ran around that for about a year with, you know, new intake of students every month. And then with being in the US, you know, that pivot was unintentional. I came for a 2-month trip due to COVID. Hong Kong canceled flights back from 8 countries in January of 2022. So I couldn't get back home.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I thought I was going to be in Hong Kong for 20, 30, 40 years, that I was going to retire there, have kids there, all of that. And I mean, who knows? Never say never. It might still happen that way. But in the year prior to that, I'd had a lot of, you know, urging from family members, a lot of opportunity of like, hey, come to the US. We've got a job for you doing this. You know, why don't you leave Hong Kong? There's not much going on there. And I was really resistant to it. I did not want to leave. I wanted to be in Hong Kong. So being here when it happened, I actually had the thought of, oh, I really like Austin. I might extend my trip here and go back to Hong Kong. Guess what? The next day, I literally woke up, my flight was canceled.
Wow.
And I couldn't get back for 4 months. Yeah. So I thought, okay, sign from the universe. I'm going to listen. So just as you said, I could do my business from anywhere. So I started to travel. I was pivoting all over the US. I went to Australia and Mexico and a few other places, and was pivoting my mindset, you know, joining different programs, meeting new people, expanding my understanding of how to run a business, how I wanted my life to look like, how I wanted to feel every single day, and being able to make choices that could lead me there. And most recently, I did move to Austin. So I moved there at the end of Q3, which actually I had said to myself in the beginning of the year, I'll move there by Q3. And so that happened. And since then, really just diving into, you know, the community there. I've refocused my business back onto aviation, working in the aviation and aerospace sector, and having those conversations with people in airlines, business aviation companies, aerospace companies, and just allowing myself to play with the concept of space and building that into my day, because it can be hard. I like what I do. I love to learn. I can, you know, get in the laptop 16 hours later, be like, oh my gosh, what happened? Didn't go outside, barely went to the bathroom, drank water, you know, we've all been there.
Yeah.
And, you know, scheduling it into my day, that's been actually a game changer.
Yeah.
Having a notification go off and go like, hey, it's Sarah's self-care time, Sarah's space. Yeah. And then just stopping what I'm doing and going and doing it and allowing myself that, you know, it's kind of like your laptop. When you don't turn it off for a week, couple weeks, couple months, all of a sudden it gets really slow. Yeah. Things start to freeze. You know, you might be in the middle of a project and your computer crashes, didn't autosave. So allowing the space has created more awareness for me to be able to understand how I'm feeling, what I'm feeling, what do I need to do to feel something different if I want to feel something different. And just paying attention to those clues. Our bodies have so much information to give us, but most of us just ignore them. Yeah. And we distract, you know, by doing other things. So slowing down has allowed me to have that pivot. You know, I went on a 10-day silent meditation course, the Vipassana meditation. And that was what gave me the clarity to know, like, I'm going back into aviation. And that is a stepping stone for space. Don't know how it's all going to pan out. Doesn't matter. but I'm going to follow that.
Right.
You know, I have the solution for people in this industry. I know how to speak their language. Why wouldn't I go back into it? It makes sense. And it's fun. You know, I enjoy it. I geek out on all the aviation news and those things, right?
Yeah.
And then every time I've gone and deliberately, intentionally given myself space, that awareness allows me to have clarity to the point where I feel good taking action. And then I make a decision. And that's the biggest thing. Without that clarity, I sit in this indecisive space. That doesn't feel good. And I agonize over it, when if I would have just made a decision, any decision, I
Right.
could have gone through that a lot more quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the in between with the decision, right? That
Yeah.
is the most energetically draining.
Yes.
Yeah. So space comes, gives us clarity, can give
Mhm.
us clarity, can heighten our awareness. And I feel like those are just essential. Like, in a nutshell, what you've given us today in this interview is, I feel like it's just wrapped up beautifully in that, the word space keeps coming up, no accident, and the clarity that can come with allowing yourself space. And
Mm.
I'm so happy that you also brought in those pieces about space for self-care. This is Sarah's space. Um, Something that I feel like we're all heightening our awareness about, and how we can kind of pre-pave that so that we don't have to do like how you described your computer, crashing. We don't have to crash before we give ourselves what we need, what we want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of us have, with hustle culture, learned to fill space. If
Yes.
there's white space on the calendar, fill it with something. Go create a meeting, go study something, go take a course, go to the gym, right? We're constantly, it was almost like we got the dopamine release by seeing a full schedule because we
Yeah.
felt important and we were
Right.
rewarded for that, right? And now there's this pendulum swing into the other direction, but we have to make sure that it's not at the cost of action,
Mhm.
but that we are intentionally creating and allowing for space. So we actually can't create the space, but we have to allow for it, as you said. By scheduling it into your calendar, you're allowing it to happen.
Yes.
Giving yourself a buffer between meetings, 15 minutes, not just 3 to 4, then 4 to 5, because as soon as you're late on one thing, the cascade waterfall effect comes in, and now you have less and less and less space.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about that buffer when you said that word. So we both love learning new things, right? And I've discovered that if I don't give myself a buffer in between, like after I'm learning something, give myself a little space to integrate it or think about it or
Mm.
go for a walk and kind of let it, settle in. Or, like, for example, instead of picking up one book, reading, and then another book, reading, like if there's no digestion space, it's not gonna, it doesn't go anywhere. And so, yeah, it's so important.
I think digestion space as well as integration space,
Yeah.
right? We are not constantly eating all day long. We
Right.
need that time in between for the food to be digested and converted to energy and utilized, right? And think about underconsumption, right? We then are malnourished. We don't take as much action because we can't. And when we overconsume, we have excess weight. We can't move as quickly, right? And it's the same thing with whether we're consuming food or information or knowledge. And let me tell you something, this is not a popular opinion, but if you read something, if you learn something, but you do nothing with it, it's like you don't know it at all.
Yeah.
It's a complete waste of your time, and you will not have any change. Right. This is why we can go to a workshop or watch a movie and be so inspired and do nothing. Right. That's why New Year's resolutions often fail too, because we're not looking at the sustainability portion of it. How do we integrate this into our life? Yes, it's a great idea, but how do you make it work for you? How do you make sure you do it consistently? Right. And I think that's where we're missing space. We need the space between the learning and then the doing and then the assessing and realigning. A lot of people stop after the doing. Oh, that didn't feel good. Push-ups don't feel good.
Right.
But they get you to the result that you want. If you want to gain strength, if you want to have toned arms, so that what? Why are you doing the thing? And I think that's why a lot of people get stuck in the trap of learning because they want to be perfect.
Yeah.
I just learned this one more thing, then I will be able to sell this. If I learn this one more thing, then I'll be worthy enough for this person to hire me, or for this person to date me, or whatever it is. And so that can be a way to hide from what you need to be doing. And a lot of times it's not because we're scared that we can't get it. It's we're scared that we can, and then we don't know what to do with it once we can.
Yeah.
My partner always says, the dog that, chases the car, like if he caught the car, what would the dog do?
What would they do?
It'd be like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then they kind of stand there awkwardly, bark and wag their tail and just, and then you're like, oh, is that all you wanted? And it's like, yeah, they just wanted to chase it, but they don't know what to do with it once they get it.
Yeah.
And so we have to make sure that we're not doing the same thing.
Yes. Oh, such a good point. Well, as we wrap up, is there anything that comes to mind for you that you feel like would just be, leave people with another thought on thriving?
Yeah. I would like to invite everyone to just close their eyes for a minute and just think of a time where you felt extremely confident, extremely fulfilled, serene, in flow. And I want you to just go back to that time and notice what's going on around you. What are the things in your environment? Who are you with? Is it daytime or nighttime? How old are you? Was this a recent memory? Long time ago? Get down to the nitty-gritty details. Can you smell anything? Can you taste anything? What's the sensation in your body? And just smile to yourself as you go back into this memory, feeling your own light, feeling your own power, your own strength. And asking yourself, how can I bring one element of how I feel right now into my day today? Maybe it's a flavor of something you haven't enjoyed for a while that you're going to make tonight for dinner. Or maybe it's a scent of a flower that you can go and get at the store and bring home. Maybe it's talking to that person you haven't spoken to in a while. You've been meaning to call and reach out, but life got in the way. So maybe today, that's the one thing you can do. The person that was there with you in that memory, give them a call, send them a message. And as you remember these things about who you are and what makes you smile, the more and more you remember these things, the easier it becomes to do them. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes, maybe take a note of what popped up for you. And then I invite you to set a reminder in your calendar once a week. You can do it more often if you choose, but once a week, ask yourself this question. Go into a memory and see what you can extract. What will help you thrive? And then go and do it.
Mm. Oh, that was a beautiful ending. That's so empowering.
Thank you.
Yes. So appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
You're very
Thank you
welcome.
for the beautiful discussion, and cheers to what's ahead in 2023, my friend.
Thank you so much.